ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us in yet another edition of Monuments on LTN television. Living in the Northwest Regional Capital of BANDA, we pack our bags for the country's political capital, where we are graced to meet the president himself. You'll ask me why I call him the president. Every December 31st, you listen to a voice. Every February 10th, you listen to another voice. And on very special occasions, you listen to that voice when there is need for the president to address the population of Cameroon. And in the early 70s, it is true, some of you were so hooked up to Hotline on Radio Cameroon. And it is true that every one of you watching at this point in time, you're hooked to the CRTV every morning for the reflections. Yes, I know. And it's also true that many of you have been traumatized by certain situations. You run to the National Association of Torture run by the same president. And it's also true, those of you of the media landscape, you're asking yourself so many questions of late due to certain decisions that were taken, and his signature was posted under those decisions. Many of you have made remarks, many of you have said things you do not know much about, others know a little, and we hope that at the end of the show we'll have a whole lot of clarification on some of those decisions you and I did not understand. I call him Mr. President. You will want to know why, and suddenly because of the show you would understand why I call him Mr. President. Many of you will call him Mr. Vice President of the NCC, and some of you will join me to call him the President because every December 31st, like I said before, and every February 10, you listen to him talk. And today he'll be talking again, so we can listen and get knowledge that will help us to grow inside and outside of the country. Good evening, sir. Thanks for having us on Monuments.
Good evening, Amy. It's so wonderful to have you right here in the capital city. I would say unexpectedly, but satisfactorily.
Retired, but not tired.
I would like to desist from that cliche of retired, but not tired. Honestly, I don't think any one of us should actually retire. It's a process. We move along. Maybe we are slow in doing certain things. Retiring from, for instance, the public service is not retiring from life, because life continues every day. The only time that you will retire is when you will take that last breath and you will be welcomed home, if you are a true believer, to the heavenly paradise.
And home to rest indeed.
Absolutely.
Tell us, how did it all begin, and how did you manage to become the successful professional that you are in the media landscape of Cameroon?
Sometimes I wonder whether I should call myself successful. This could be someone else's assessment. However, what I have done with my life is trying as much as possible to apply the basic principles of the job that I do, so I can give satisfaction to he who listens to me, because most of the time I've been into broadcasting, and so I pass on a message vocally. There are others who are journalists who write out their own messages, but I have been a talking journalist, and I want to believe that I have had some kind of impact on people. I did the best, probably to improve on my diction. It has been common practice or parlance that I try as much as possible to talk like the English. Some say I try to talk like the Americans. And so I am in between all of those, because after all, my whole educational career was in English. And I spent a few extra years of that educational career in the United States of America. So at least I have the two cultures flowing in me. But I think the predominant culture that I have in me is more British. So that's the way. Now, a successful broadcast journalist is one who can speak it out and people will understand, and they would probably follow, because sometimes when we listen to broadcasters today, you start wondering, but should this person be a broadcaster at all, because of the way they speak, the way they use the language, the way they ramble. And it sometimes puzzles me as an individual how they got there in the first place. So I made lots of efforts listening to the BBC, listening to even the VOA, and listening to other well-renowned stations at the time when we were growing up. The Ghanaians were so good. I would listen to Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. I would listen to the NBC, that's the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, and all of that created an impact on me, and I did the little research that you could do in order to improve on yourself from the perspective of your diction, the perspective of the flow of language, and of course I did an English degree, which also helped me in terms of my phonetics, and the syntactic manner with which one has to speak the language of, let me say, our colonial masters. So that's how I kept improving. I do remember when I was in the United States, and I had to be like the spokesperson of our group of journalists who went there. And they always asked me to speak. Most of the time, every American was asking me, "Did you study in Britain? Did you study in England?" I told them no. I never even spent a day in England. I studied in Cameroon. That's what I did. And then I went to America only after some time, but not to study language as such. So my background is British.
We understand in some years you were chanced. I don't know if I should put it you were chanced, maybe because of your professional strength. You met this president, many considered to be a dictator. But you talked to him. What was the magic? How did it happen? And what did he tell you about himself in Africa? We're talking about Idi Amin.
Now, Amy, look, journalists are sometimes adventurous. Except you're a coward. In the days of Idi Amin, it was difficult even to talk to him. Most of the people who had interviewed Idi Amin during his period or reign of terror, as some people described it, were Western journalists, Western professionals. African journalists had never talked to Idi Amin because everybody heard of his barbarous attitude. Many of them talked of him as being carnivorous and that he could eat people. And so everybody stayed away from him. So I got to Uganda. It was for a sporting event. That was boxing. At the time I was doing sports commentaries. And in almost every sport, I covered boxing, I covered football, I covered, well, you name it. So long as it was sports, I did. So I went to Uganda for a boxing tournament, the All Africa boxing competitions. And the president, Idi Amin at the time, opened the ceremony. Thereafter, at a little reception, quite late in the night, I cornered the Minister of Sports, who himself was a general in the army of Uganda, and asked him, how possible is it for a journalist to interview the president or to talk to the president? Because I wouldn't want to call it an interview. I said to talk to the president. And the minister said, "You are from where?" I told him, "I'm from Cameroon. I'm a journalist from Cameroon, and I would like to talk to the president." So I said, "Okay, Mr. Essoka, give me some time." This was about midnight. At 6 a.m., that's the next morning, my hotel door room rattled. And I said, "Wow, who is this?" I was just trying to take a rest, because after going to bed at about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, somebody is bugging my soul. What is the problem? So I got up with a lot of sleep in my eyes and lazily walked to the door. I asked, "Who is there?" They just told me, "Open the door." And I said, "Who is there?" He said, the Minister of Sports. I said, oh my God, a whole general. So I opened the door, and lo and behold, this minister was standing there, tall and almost as huge as Idi Amin himself, and said, Mr. Essoka, within the next 30 minutes, I want you to be ready because we're going to take you. The President of the Republic is waiting for you. I said, at what time? Now? I'm not ready. He said, sir, you asked for an interview, and the President is ready. So you put on something on you and follow me. I was stunned. I started quaking. I mean, I trembled because I didn't know. With all the stories I'd heard of Idi Amin, I just thought maybe that was the end of me. Why must he readily respond to me and with such urgency? So I put on something. I carried my tape recorder. Those days we had the Nagras, very heavy instrument. I put it on my shoulder. I almost broke my shoulder. And got downstairs, the hotel room. I wanted to tell the head of my delegation, but I said, no, let me go on this adventure, because if I call him now, start some formalities, you have to do this and that. I said, no, I'll do like a journalist and I'll go and make my inquiries. So out there, the minister was waiting with his car. They got me into the car. In front there was a jeep full of military people. Behind us another jeep full of military people, and was driven with pomp to the presidency. And when I got in, as we entered the courtyard, here stood this huge man, Idi Amin Dada.
When you met him, how did you feel like meeting this huge man?
No, first of all, I was frightened by this.
I told us more.
But you see, since I had already met him the night before at the ceremony,
good control.
I took charge of myself, and then he said, you are Mr. Essoka, you are a journalist from Cameroon. I said, yes, Mr. President, I'm a journalist from Cameroon. You said you wanted to talk to me. Yeah, I said, yes, sir. He said, okay. And he held me by the hand as if we were colleagues. And we walked right inside the presidency to his, what the Americans will call, his Oval Room. Not a small, tiny room, private room, where just two of us almost could fit, except probably the media men who were already there. See, the alert went everywhere, and the place was full of journalists and cameramen and all kinds of things. So I said, wow, this is efficiency par excellence. And I got there, and he took me to that room and made me sit down. And truly, truly, we spoke like two heads of state, because we exchanged courtesies and talked about ourselves, talked about our countries, and a number of other things. And I started asking myself, like, where am I? Am I really a journalist talking to an Idi Amin, a small journalist? How much qualification did I have to have such honor? But then I discovered I started getting much at ease. First of all, I didn't even know what questions I was going to ask him, because I was afraid that I may ask a question and it would implicate me in one way or the other. So anyway, we took our time, and 40 minutes just talking. He asked me about President Ahijo at the time. He said he was instrumental for the election of Tekim Buma as Secretary General of the Organization of African Unity, and he knew what the problems were with the former Secretary General, that's Tekim Buma, no, rather Nzo Eka Ngaki. So anyway, we settled on a number of issues, and finally I just said, okay, Mr. President, can we go ahead with the interview? He said, okay, I'm ready when you are. So the first question, of course, in order to get myself led into this whole interview business was about sports, because I knew he was a sportsman. He was a boxer, a heavyweight boxer of Uganda. So I started from there, and what his impression was about boxing in Africa. And that's how we went on. And then, of course, question followed question. And at the end of the day, I had a full hour's interview with Idi Amin Dada to say, you know, in this country, archives and so forth are hardly kept. And so interviews like that have disappeared ever since. And no one can even remember that it ever did happen, and that I was one of the first ever African journalists to interview Idi Amin in those days. And of course I asked him very daring questions, including the Asians who had just been dismissed or expelled from Uganda. And Uganda was suffering economically. Hotel rooms didn't have water. There was a lot of disorder. But on the other hand, Uganda was still sparkling clean, because the streets of Uganda are not like some of our streets. They are well paved and cleaned every day. I mean, you'll see women, working women, sweeping the streets with their brooms. I mean, modern technology had not reached where it is today, but they used their brooms to make sure that any leaf that fell from a tree was taken off the street. And so there was absolute neatness, cleanliness, what I pray someday we can boast of around here.
The journey to 2009 begins with a step. Probably they had one step to make until they got there. So just as much as you hope with a good heart, we're also hoping that we will get there too. It will be like the town of Limbe, or one time the town of Bamenda at the time of Albert Nde, when he was the government delegate. I'd like us to have a short break. We will listen to this report and we'll watch the images. You made promises on December 31st, 2013, and I'd like to know how far you've gone with the implementation of these promises. Shall we, Mr. President? The announcement of the employment of 250,000 youths is one thing Mr. Biya can brag about in his 2014 Youth Day Eve address.
Higher targets have been set for 2014. With the possible increase in the country's growth rate, we hope to create more than 250,000 new jobs. Of course, this will not benefit only the youth.
This revelation swelled up strains of hope in the nation's most valuable asset, encouraged with avenues to explore potentials for the economic recovery and development of the nation. Recognizing the obvious social role played by the motorcycle taxi riders, the massive participation and mobilization of the youth during the September 30 twin municipal and legislative elections, the number one personality of the Republic of Cameroon reminded the youth of substantial efforts they must make to remain factors of development. For these efforts to fully pay off, the youth must undertake training programs that will fine-tune their talents to cope with new tasks and future major projects that will need competent services from qualified professionals. Mr. Biya did not overlook the government's signal to police acts of indecency, robbing the nation's pride to mourn. He called on the youth to outrightly decline public immoral acts denaturing the moral standards and values of the country, Cameroon. Unlike his December 31st end-of-year speech, Mr. Biya underscored aspects of reunification, which, according to him, can only be achieved by a free, determined, and progressive youth. Hundreds of employment opportunities promised to the youth of Cameroon, and the clarion call for the youth of Cameroon to be decent and become factors of development for the Republic of Cameroon. How far has Mr. President implemented these promises for the youth of Cameroon?
We are still in the middle of the year, and lots of things are happening. Developments are taking place at different stages. Some employment opportunities have been created, And the youth themselves have been called to create theirs. And so the professionalization of our education is something worthy for them to come out and not only depend on the civil service, but also look around at what they can do for themselves. Let them go, even like the Kennedy philosophy. Don't ask
not what my country has done for me,
but what you can do for
your country.
the country. So we are expecting that while there are difficulties, definitely, you cannot rule those out, there's definitely some kind of slight improvement in the way employment opportunities are coming our way and the young people's way. You know, one thing that is very characteristic of us is to blame the older generation and say, hey, these people, they're always there. They don't want to go. Yeah, I'm one of the victims. They don't want to go. They don't want to allow those places, create opportunities for the younger people so that they can take over. No, the youth should not only wait to take over from those who are going. The youth should make an effort to get it. Don't wait for somebody to do it for you. Light the fire for yourself, and you can see what tremendous things can happen to you. You may ask me, oh, did you do that at your time? You people just left secondary school and, of course, jobs were available. Yes, that is true. Mm-hmm. But the times have changed. Mm-hmm. Lots of things have changed. The technological perspectives are so different, mm-hmm. and that opportunities come from everywhere. Whereas we only had one focus, and that's it. And when we missed it, it was difficult for us to get anything else. Mm-hmm. And how many of us were there? It was possible for the civil service to absorb the few people who left secondary schools. For instance, West Cameroon had 2 secondary schools for boys and 1 secondary school for girls. Consequently, when we're coming out, the job opportunities,
the job market was really full.
Employers came to secondary schools to take us away, mm-hmm. to fill up some of those places. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen today. Mm-hmm. So people have to start working on how to create things for themselves. Creative minds.
Mm-hmm. Talk about having creative minds and create things for themselves. How enabling is the environment to allow those youth become entrepreneurs? Like the British High Commissioner I was talking to last Thursday said, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of dynamism, but the enabling environment sometimes may not be the best.
It's true. I would not disagree with that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's one of my complaints always. The freedom to do the things that you want to do when you want to do them. Mm-hmm. Well, when I talk about the word freedom, I have jitters because sometimes people say, oh, then let everybody to do the things that... No, freedom has its limits.
That's true.
Freedom has its limits. You don't just because you say you're free, do whatever you want to do. There are strategies. People create places where they can operate. Mm-hmm. And while the environment is not very enabling, because there are so many things that still have to be done, mm-hmm. and as you said, it is left for the government mm-hmm. to create that enabling environment, especially when people want to create their own stuff. Mm-hmm. They must, going through all the bureaucratic hurdles and you name them. Mm-hmm. It becomes very difficult, it becomes very frustrating. And we're just hoping that that environment, like in many other places, can be created so that young people, entrepreneurs who want to come forward with something may do so with greater ease and not the harassment of some officials who would always want to have a pound of flesh out of people before they are able to give them anything.
Because of corruption, you turn the AIDS of the society.
Absolutely. That's what I did. I call corruption the AIDS of society, mm-hmm. and AIDS the corruption of the body.
You're watching Monuments on LTM television, and we are celebrating Mr. Peter Essoka, the voice of the president, the president of the Association of Torture in Cameroon, member of the Commission of Freedom and Human Rights, I hope I'm getting it right, and a source of inspiration to many seats in the journalism profession in and out of Cameroon. And I'm sure that one who talks to you every morning on the Sierra TV on weekdays through the program of SWAT Reflections, and it's always setting the pace for your day. And when there is no hope because yesterday was gloomy and sad, when you listen to Reflections, you have a reason to wake up, stand on your feet, and believe in the day with the hope that that day, today, will be better and tomorrow could even be best. Let's talk a little bit about freedom. Freedom is a word that has a precise definition from the Oxford Dictionary or any other dictionary. But you have a definition you give to this word, freedom. And the word freedom has robbed this profession you love so much of its nobility that I believe if you had the chance and choice to pluck out freedom from the dictionary, you would.
I should, because let me tell you, Annie, when we were doing what we called the British Constitution, long time ago, but we know that the British Constitution, the British don't have a written constitution. It's more of a respect for deontology, respect for ethics. And my dear, if you respect ethics, you know what your limitations are. You would not go beyond certain things. You would not be injurious. You would not be abusive. You would not be indecent. You would not be defamatory. You would try as much as possible, especially in the profession of journalism, to set a pace. You are a pace setter, and you're not going to set a pace in breaking, in negation. We should be positive thinkers. And hey, I don't say you shouldn't criticize. Absolutely, that is almost our role. We have to set the pace going. And in criticism, you can make certain people stand up. But criticize with positivity. Don't always be negative. Don't criticize seeing nothing good at all about anybody else. What about you? Are you sane? Are you so sanctimonious that everybody else is a fiend?
Exactly.
Everybody else is a devil? Everybody else is a numbskull? Everybody else is a non-entity? You stand out outrightly. Oh, Mr. Essoka is this, Mrs. Essoka is that, Mr. This is this, and you alone, you stand out as the only person. Man, you're not God. You're not.
Yeah.
And in journalism, we are not gods. We have our many faults. I have hundreds and hundreds of them. I falter as much as you do. Let's suppose that the things you say about other people are said about you. How would you feel? And that's where my worry is. Why must we take upon ourselves to be the advocates of the devil, of evil, of bad, rather than of good? Because when we talk good, we have an impact on our society.
You're correct.
A positive impact. Unfortunately, you see, when you take your child, and every day you call her, you're a fool, you're a fool, you're a fool.
That child grows up to be a fool.
Of course. There are so many things that child will do foolishly. Whereas, if you encouraged him, not pamper him, but encourage that child to grow up in a certain manner, I tell you the truth, you'll have an angel.
You're correct.
So, what are our journalists doing today in this rampantness of wanting to be first in certain things, you destroy everything. I talked about the British Constitution, and the first statement that we learned was complete freedom destroys freedom. Freedom is not to be controlled. In any free democracy, freedom of the press is the number one thing that democracy should have.
Yeah, the reason why we had the movement across the globe when what happened in Paris happened on the 7th of January. Je suis Charlie.
Je suis Charlie. Okay, yes, some people said, oh well, the journalists ought not to have been killed. Those people were trying to control people's freedom. They had a freedom to talk about it. But freedom should have had its limits.
Talk about
Sometimes
limits.
you're warned. You're warned. For instance, in this case, the Charlie journalists were warned by these extremists. Be careful. You've insulted our religious leader. So be careful. Now it is for us as professionals who reason, who are responsible to take measures how we report on certain of those issues. But if we don't care and we say whatever we want to say, the repercussions could be very grave. And so we have to be very careful.
And recently, you're someone who'd like things to be done the right way. And no matter the circumstance, you do not think that for a cup of coffee, people can sell out their conscience and do the contrary of what they are supposed to do. At no point in time should a cup of coffee prevent you from doing the right thing. And recently you signed a couple of decisions taken by a committee of the National Communications Council in Cameroon.
Members of the National Communication.
Thanks for the correction. Now, so much saliva has been spilling, so much ink has been flowing, and so many papers are sold because of title. Media landscape will not respect NCC sanctions. Peter Essoka has done this or that. Can you tell us a little bit about the sanctions, if we can go that far, if we are allowed to go that far, and whether or not you are in the capacity as interim president for the National Communications Council to sign those decisions? And for those people who believe that your mandate expired on December 4 because Befe Ateba, peace upon his soul, died on June 4.
And six months later.
Thank you very much. Are we waiting for another presidential decree for a new president for the NCC so the right decisions could be taken by the president and we won't have the saliva spilling and ink flowing like it's happening in Cameroon?
Don't you worry, my dear. The decree reorganizing the National Communication Council on the 23rd of January 2012 states clearly in its Article 15 that in the absence of the president, the vice president takes over and there is continuity of that institution. Because some president died or some leader died doesn't mean the country or that institution will come to a standstill and nothing will happen to it. The deadline of 6 months is stated there. But remember, the position of president or vice president is not, I say again, not elective. It is by presidential decree. And until such decree is signed, saying that Mr. Essoka should no longer act and that a new president has been appointed, not elected, then my mandate will end. Until then, I am the de facto head of the National Communication Council. And nobody can take that away from me at this time except the President of the Republic. So whatever saliva or whatever ink is flowing, let me state and categorically that the position I hold is authoritative and it comes from the President of the Republic, and until the President of the Republic tells me, Mr. Essoka, don't do what you're doing anymore, that's when I'll stop. It is not some of those probably ununderstanding people who read texts and give different interpretations to them, because you need to go and see the state of that institution for you to be able to give certain interpretations. Some of them have said things about the National Communications Council. None of them has stepped foot in this place to find out what actually is happening. So they ramble and say whatever they want to say, being insulting and calling me names and saying of my inability to lead this group. Some have even challenged my qualification, my ability. Some say I was a common animator of radio who knows nothing, who's probably not been to school, whom Paul Biya has appointed into a very important organ like the National Communication Council. I'm glad some of them even say a very important organ, but some of them even spite the National Communication Council and say it has no right for us to know. They disqualify even all the other members of the council because one of those newspapers printed all of our pictures and say this is nothing, this one is nonsense, this one. But then these are people who are professionals like they are. Most of them, we have two or so who are not of the journalistic corps, but they are professors, able people in the society. And so some guys who probably have not even gone to school take upon themselves and say all sorts of things about us. In fact, I was so scandalized when I was listening to a debate, and this was on STV. And one of those fellows in Douala calls me Machen. I don't even know how to quite interpret that. But it's almost like a rug, a door rug where you wipe your feet. You're useless. You're nothing. Yes. Amy, I have 48 years of experience in the profession of journalism. I'm not a baby. And I think I have been to school. I have been to a school of academics. I've been to a school of experience. I've been to every school you can think of. I have taken part in the life of this country in every aspect of it, both political, economic, social, name it. And I see nothing wrong with what we're doing. But again, I come back to the issue of whether I am or I have the ability to run or that my mandate is over. No, my mandate is not over until Mr. Paul Biya signs his decree and appoints somebody else as president of the National Communications Council, and Mr. Essoka remains as vice president, or Mr. Essoka is uplifted to the position of president. Period.
Tell me, Mr. President, how autonomous and independent is the National Communications Council of Cameroon? Some say a visit paid by the French ambassador to Cameroon at the NCC spite the decision that you took of recent. And others say there was a visit you made to the US Embassy sometime September last year, and somewhere along the line they infiltrated into the decision making that happened a few months ago. What do you have to say about that?
The National Communication Council, by the decree of January 23rd, 2012, is autonomous and independent. It has nothing to do with any influence from anybody. Let me tell you something. Even the Prime Minister of the Republic, under whose guise we are operating, because we are somehow attached to the services of the Prime Minister's office, and that's just for our financial, let me call them remunerations or allowances. They come from the budget of the Prime Minister. And that's it. The Prime Minister doesn't know what is happening. All he knows is at the end of the year, we write a report about our activities and we send that to him. Some think the Minister of Communication is our titular authority. No, the Minister of Communication has practically nothing to do with us. Otherwise, Mr. Issa Chiroma wouldn't have been sending us complaints about some journalists and so forth. If he had the power over us, he would give us instructions. But that is not what Mr. Issa Chiroma, the Minister of Communication, the spokesperson of the government, did. He sent a normal complaint like everybody else. You could send us a complaint about A, B, C journalist or whatever who has abused you, insulted you, defamed you. We don't take defamatory things because those are of the legal profession, of the law courts. But when it deals with ethics and deontology, that's our responsibility. The Americans. We went to the Americans, no doubt, because we want to spread out our tentacles with our partners, which is a good thing. We're not operating in isolation. Absolutely not.
And recently you were in Abidjan.
Well, I was in Abidjan. Well, it's because we are a member. We're a member of the regulatory association of French-speaking regulatory, or the Francophonie regulatory board. So we as members, of course, we're attending a conference that was organized in Abidjan. But talking about the French or the Americans or the British, because we also went to the British, we went to the European Union, we went to different places to inform them of the role of the National Communication Council, because many of them were given different opinions, because some journalists went to the Americans and told them how we are a censorship board rather than a regulatory board. And that
yes, I was told that you had to give them a copy.
Of course. And the same with the British, the same with... And during those meetings, my dear, we asked them for possibilities of creating ways and means by which journalists could be trained in their countries, that they should organize certain seminars that will help the journalists' corps to grow. We didn't go there for anything. And here I got 350 million CFA francs from the French in order for me to, oh my God, I shouldn't be here if I had 350 million francs in my pocket. What am I doing? What is it I'm earning at the National Communication Council?
How useful is the experience you had in Abidjan to the communication landscape of Cameroon? After your trip, how do you think the media landscape can benefit from the resourceful knowledge you picked up from that conference?
There's one thing we're going to suggest again to the Minister of Communication, who for now is responsible for giving out some of these allowances to private media and so forth at the end of the year, actually giving out peanuts to journalists, because what the Cameroon government gives out to the journalists is peanuts, and it doesn't help in any way. It's provocative. I think when you give such money to an editor, what do you expect him to do? You give him 1 million francs, you give some 750,000 CFA francs. How can you run a newspaper or a magazine with that kind of money? It's for that editor to put it in his pocket and buy his beignet or puff puff or whatever you want to call it. But then what we experienced, I had a 2-hour discussion with the Minister of Communication of Cote d'Ivoire. She had been to this country, and of course we had insulted her and called her bordel or a prostitute, a street woman. Yes, that's what we did. That's what our media did. We call a personality from another country such horrendous names. And but even then, she welcomed us, because when she came here, we received her. And of course, when I went there, it was a pleasure for her to welcome us. And I spent 2 hours with this woman, and we talked of everything and almost nothing. It was a wonderful experience. Of course, he revealed to us, just as what he had revealed when he came here, of the yearly growth of Côte d'Ivoire. And you could see from the developments that are taking place, especially in Abidjan, because we didn't go out of Abidjan, so I cannot speak for the rest of the country. But for the capital city, of course, it was booming. Everything was booming, and I felt almost sad. I felt almost sad.
Because you say yes. Contrary of what you have in Cameroon.
And then when she told me, the journalist, each newspaper or magazine that is in operation in Abidjan or in Côte d'Ivoire receives 48 million CFA francs a year for their operations, compared to 1 million in Cameroon. It's an insult.
Indeed, there's enough for everybody's need and not for everybody's greed.
Now, one thing you must note is there's been a sort of limitation of how many newspapers or whatever. Yeah, there's freedom, but there's a limit. In Cameroon, you have almost 600 tabloids operating in this country. Give me a break.
You can't read all of them.
How many? You can't read all of them, but to how many of them can you give assistance? I think that's the position of the government. Embarrassing. How do you do it? But then it is also fault in who you give licenses to operate. There are 100 television stations operating or radio stations. So what do you do? And most of them are not authorized.
Yeah, on the administrative tolerance.
Administrative tolerance. That's the coinage these days. Administrative tolerance. And there are those maxims that we use every day, and we find ourselves in deep trouble. Because what do we do now? How do we stop some of those from operating? We had already allowed them to do so. But then, if some other measures are taken, I want to believe that a total revision should be made of who is operating and who is not operating. And everybody should reapply so that we know, at least you can get those valuable things that we need to operate in this country. And then of journalists, you're going to give the press card to who? There is such rampantness in what is happening today. Everybody stands up one good morning, hallelujah, and he's there operating a newspaper or doing something. You go and look for where their headquarters are, and you don't find anything. Recently, as we're making our tours in the country, we go to places and we find out, oh, this newspaper is operating in this place. But you go there and you find nobody, no headquarters. So people move along with their briefcases and their computers, and they are operating a newspaper or whatever it is.
Let's come back to the sanctions, Mr. President. For those media organs that who received, if I can put it that way, sanctions recently, is there anything they could do to allow the NCC reduce the punishment? Is there any adjustments? Should some of them show signs of good conduct and morale?
Ma'am, none of them has been remorseful. Instead, they have gone wild. If you heard what some of them said and still say, if you followed debates on different media on what some of the journalists are saying, you don't expect the National Communication Council to bend. Maybe the sanctions are not implemented, and somebody says, oh, that weakens the council. No, not at all. The council has done its job, what it is supposed to do. The administration
has taken note of that.
Has taken note, and the implementation of those decisions are supposed to be by the administration. Because at the end of each decision, it is written, the governor of the region in which that media organ is operating will take note and apply or implement that decision. Let me give you an example. The first time we summoned one of those organs, let me call it Afric Media, to the council, they came with 3 lawyers, well dressed in their court attire. And I told them, hey, listen, we're not here in court. We're here to talk deontology. We're here to talk ethics. This is what you've done, this is what you've done, this is what you've done. And we're summoning you here because this person has complained about what you did. And so it is for us to talk with you and find out what measures we can take to sort of temper down the language you use in your media. We talked about journalistic responsibility. And at the end of the day, they were so apologetic. They said, oh no, oh you are our icon. But prior to that, a day or two before, they had a program for 1 hour straight on Mr. Essoka. And of course, I don't want to mention what they said about me, because I mean, if my children heard that, or my family, they'll be wondering what kind of, devil I had become. Yes, that's what they did to me. That's the kind of coloring they gave. But what is that? If I know I am doing good, and I know deep in my conscience that what I am doing is right, dear Amy, I will keep doing it every day, in spite of all the darts or arrows or whatever is pointed at me. I have around me, let me tell you something, my secret. The web, a spider web around me. And the souls and the enemies will come and pass by my cave, and they will not see me. Let me give them that. Those who threatened even to kill me, let them continue with their threats. But then, I am a favored child of God, and God watches over every move that I make. If you succeed, after all, even the Lord Jesus Christ now was smothered, was insulted, was crucified. He died. But one thing, he never died, because he conquered death through his resurrection.
Écoutez, madame, je vous remercie d'abord avant tout d'être venue au Conseil national de la communication. Regardez dans quel environnement nous travaillons, regardez de quelle manière nous travaillons de façon technique, professionnelle et très sérieuse. En ce moment même où il se dit un certain nombre de choses à propos de ce conseil par des journalistes lointains qui ne prennent jamais la peine de venir toucher le doigt la réalité de notre environnement et de nos méthodes de travail. Alors vous me demandez de vous dire ce que je pense de quelqu'un que je ne connaissais pourtant pas personnellement il y a quelques années. Peter Essoka est une voix pour moi qui avait bercé mon enfance. Lorsque j'entendais le reportage d'un certain nombre de matchs de football à une époque où le Cameroun n'avait pas de télévision, où ce monsieur vous reportait un match comme si vous étiez en train de le voir. Et cette voix emblématique, n'est-ce pas, m'a habité toute mon enfance, moi qui suis un amoureux du football. Et figurez-vous que par un joyeux décret présidentiel d'il y a quelques années, je me rends compte que je vais devoir travailler auprès de Peter Essoka. Il avait été nommé vice-président du Conseil national de la communication et le décret qui suivait, le décret présidentiel qui suivait, me nommait secrétaire général de ce conseil. Je n'avais plus qu'à remercier le chef de l'État à 2 titres. D'abord pour m'avoir D'abord parce qu'il m'avait promu à cette fonction nouvelle, mais aussi parce que je devais pouvoir travailler et toucher du doigt, n'est-ce pas, des monuments comme celui dont nous sommes en train de parler. Écoutez, par la suite, j'ai appris à connaître l'homme. J'ai appris à travailler quotidiennement avec M. Peter Essoka. C'est un leader. S'il fallait le décrire en un seul mot, je dirais c'est un leader. Vous savez, il y a des gens qui savent commander avec une poigne, avec une fermeté particulière, qui parviennent parfois au résultat ou pas, mais il y en a qui savent amener les gens vers le résultat. C'est ceux-là que j'appelle des leaders. Le leader marque par son exemple. Le leader est un meneur d'hommes. Le leader a une approche managériale qui est soft, qui est souple, mais qui est efficace. Le leader peut être sobre, mais il sait être charismatique. Le leader sait écouter, il sait faire confiance, mais il sait être exigeant professionnellement. C'est tout cela, Peter Essoka. C'est l'aîné qui vous invitera à prendre une tasse de thé dans son bureau, mais pendant que vous la prenez, il vous montrera à quel point il vous montrera à quel point il est exigeant pour le devenir de tel autre dossier. C'est cet homme qui a une belle vision des choses du haut de ses 40 ans d'expérience professionnelle dans ce métier, parce qu'on a tout entendu de cet homme par des journalistes de mauvaise foi. Quand on n'est pas de mauvaise foi, on aime que des gens comme lui soient des Camerounais. Si vous me permettez d'être un peu plus long, je voudrais vous dire ma peine ces derniers temps, lorsque j'entends le rendu d'un certain nombre d'organes de presse. Le Conseil national de la communication vient de prendre un certain nombre de décisions sanctionnant des organes de presse et certains professionnels de votre secteur professionnel. Et j'entends des commentaires qui relèvent certainement de personnes qui n'ont même pas pris la peine de lire les 3 premières lignes des décisions qui ont été prises. Et j'entends même des débordements qui sont ridicules. J'en ai entendu sur certains plateaux venant même des juristes. Peut-être qu'il vaut mieux, à ce stade de mon propos, que je vous rappelle que je suis professeur d'université, que je suis professeur de droit. Et qu'à ce titre, je suis toujours très peiné lorsque je vois, lorsque j'observe, lorsque je constate que des gens manipulent avec une légèreté totalement décriable, n'est-ce pas, certaines dispositions juridiques. J'ai entendu dire que le mandat de Peter Essoka était arrivé à son terme. Je ne sais pas si ceux qui le disent ont lu le décret présidentiel numéro 2012/038 du 23 janvier 2012 qui porte réorganisation du Conseil national de la communication. J'ai entendu par un avocat, qui est d'ailleurs un avocat sur la place de Douala, qui défend un certain organe dont je ne voudrais pas citer ici le nom pour ne pas lui faire davantage de publicité. J'ai entendu dire qu'il y a une disposition de ce décret qui ne permettait pas à M. Peter Essoka de travailler. Et cet avocat, dont je refuse de citer le nom parce que je ferai fuir toute sa clientèle dès ce propos, il cite l'article 15 de ce décret. Je voudrais, quand vous serez parti d'ici, je vous donnerai un exemplaire de ce décret, que vous le lisiez. Il cite l'article 15 pour justifier l'incompétence du président Essoka par rapport à la signature des décisions dont nous parlons. Et que dit cet article 15, madame? L'article 15 dit que, en cas de vacances provisoires d'un membre, en cas de vacances provisoires du président du Conseil, le vice-président se substitue à lui. Et si cette vacance excède une durée de 6 mois, le président de la République procède à la nomination d'un nouveau président. Je parle bien de vacances provisoires. OK? Est-ce que le décès est une vacance provisoire? Non. Cet avocat a parlé de l'article 15 pour justifier l'incapacité ou l'incompétence de Peter Essoka par rapport aux décisions qui ont été signées, d'une part. D'autre part, cet avocat qui n'est pas capable de lire 3 pages d'un décret a glorieusement évité l'article 7 et l'article 8 du même décret. L'article 7 dit que les membres du Conseil, y compris le président et le vice-président, sont nommés par décret présidentiel. Et l'article 8 dit précisément la chose suivante. En cas de vacance définitive par la démission ou par le décès d'un membre, eh bien, le président de la République procède au remplacement du dit membre conformément aux dispositions de l'article 7 que je viens de citer. C'est le seul article qui parle du décès. Or, dans la configuration actuelle de notre organe du Conseil national de la communication, nous avons perdu notre président. Notre président est décédé. Il ne s'agit pas là d'une vacance provisoire, mais il s'agit d'une vacance définitive du fait de la mort. Cette affaire-là est réglée par les articles 7 et 8 du décret et non par l'article 15 du décret. Après cela, vous vous rendrez d'ailleurs compte que les articles 7 et 8 ne fixent aucun délai au président de la République, n'est-ce pas, pour remplacer un membre du Conseil. Lesquels membres ont été nommés il y a bientôt 3 ans, n'ont pas épuisé leur première mandature, parce que même lorsqu'ils l'auront épuisé, le décret dit qu'ils ont un mandat de 3 ans renouvelable. Et donc, ils pourront être reconduits à leur mandat, mais pour le moment, ils n'ont pas épuisé les 3 années de leur mandat. On entend un certain nombre de choses comme ça lorsque les gens sont de mauvaise foi. On est d'autant plus gêné que cela provienne parfois des avocats de certains qui sont chargés de défendre certains organes de presse, et on se dit que la mauvaise foi peut conduire à l'ignorance. J'espère qu'ils l'ont fait par mauvaise foi et pas par ignorance, parce que s'ils le font par ignorance, à partir de ce moment, j'aurai beaucoup de peine par rapport à la capacité de ces avocats qui défendent certains organes de presse au Cameroun. Alors voilà ce que je voulais dire à propos de cet aîné pour lequel j'ai beaucoup d'admiration. Ceux qui connaissent mon caractère savent très bien que je ne suis pas facile et que je ne donne pas de compliments qui ne sont pas mérités. Mais je dois vous dire que j'en ai connu d'autres, mais je travaille à côté de quelqu'un qui est un exemple pour moi, qui est un exemple de pondération, qui est un exemple d'efficacité, qui est un exemple de droiture et de bienveillance, et qui a le sens de l'intérêt commun et de l'intérêt national. Et bien, à partir de ce moment-là, je ne peux que féliciter, n'est-ce pas, l'opportunité et l'initiative de cette émission qui parle des monuments, qui parle de grands hommes. Parlez donc de Roger Mila, parlez donc de Samuel Eto'o, parlez de Peter Essoka. Il y en a bien d'autres comme ça, parce que notre pays aimerait bien aussi savoir vendre et vanter ses monuments. C'est ça un pays qui a une histoire.
Few minutes to go, and if you're just joining us, it's Monuments on LTM television, and we are talking to Mr. Peter Essoka, the voice of the president, the vice president of the NCC, and the interim president of the NCC, and also the president of the association fighting against torture, celebrated every year on the 26th of June. Now we're going to select some pictures, we'll roll them over and have him say something about these personalities and see the kind of work relationship he kept with them. Let's start with the first picture, Mr. President.
Ansang, yeah, with all my regrets to have lost somebody like her, because she was everything. Humble, intuitive, jovial, good looking, always with a smile. And I would always love to be in her company because I like working with good company. Ephraim BANDA Gogomo, sure, the guy with a golden voice. He almost spoke like me, but you know, I had a slight edge on him because I had more experience. But he has been, and I think he still is, a journalist to count on. I think by their fruits you will know them. And Amy is the fruit of Ephraim, so that's wonderful. Eric Chinji. I worked with Eric for during his first few years in the profession, because he was still at the university. And we were at the radio, and we sort of recruited Eric. And then when I came back from the United States, I became his deputy director, while he was my editor-in-chief. before he left for what some of you call greener pastures. But that's a professional, a true one. Peter Essoka, it's difficult to say anything about himself, but I think by every standards, I'm good. Nelson Mandela, oh, my hero. I think, yes, he had his little faults here and there, but Nelson was an icon. I mean, I don't know, he left a legacy that it's difficult to catch up with. A greeting, a strong handshake with the President of the Republic, which indicates that in spite of everything, this guy can sometimes be very jovial and will be friendly with people. On the other hand, John Frundi, well, I passed by his home and we've been childhood friends. And some people were teasing me on him that because I'm a friend to Frundi, I must be SDF, I have an SDF card. No, the bare fact that you're a friend to anybody doesn't make you an adherent to whatever he's doing. But listen, I honor him. Philemon Yang, that's the Prime Minister, of course. He was a schoolmate at CPC Bali. He's always given me a lot of respect. Philemon Yang gives me a lot of respect, and I think I owe him that too, as Prime Minister. Simon Achidi Achu, wow, that's my pa. He calls me little brother, but I call him Pa Achidi. And he did his own to bring about this kind of cooperative politics. Ayisi Ayebe, Minister of, let me call it, in charge of state control. But by then, when he was greeting me here, he was Minister of External Relations. And of course, Esimi Menye, the agriculture man, and the man who, I mean, he gave me a lot of respect. At the time, he was Minister of Finance when we had that greeting. Laura Essoka, of course, the gentleman in the Ministry of Justice, and just a special relationship. After all, his name begins with an ESSO, but mine is an extension of his because it ends up with a KA. There is this is a delegation of us with Mr. Mintamak. We went to Dakar, Senegal, for a meeting of UTNA. Then, of course, here it was at the United Nations with Antoine Marie Ngono. We were the reporters when President Paul Biya visited the United Nations so many years ago.
Quite a legacy to keep, and we hope that the younger ones we claim to be, we will keep that legacy in honor with the respect of the ethics of journalism practice in Cameroon. We still have a future, and the future is still bright when we have hope. I remember sometime in 2012, you were Chris Carson, the National Territory, to present Journey into My House. Stand up, be strong, don't quit. Lamentations for my beloved country. In Yaoundé, Bamenda, the Southwest region, you name the rest.
Douala.
Douala? How could I forget Douala?
Where you come from.
Oh my God. Maybe I'm still not satisfied because I thought we could have done better. Do we have any plans in the future for any possible launch of many more reflections?
I mean, you see this volumes that have been compiled already. Now we just need to make them into smaller, cut them into smaller compartments, okay, so that we can put them to the market. And you know, this is a continuing process. Every day for 4 days in the week, I write reflections, and so they keep piling. I mean, even in our computers, as every day we do these things, we have lots and lots, much more than this. These two big volumes that you see here, there are still some more. And we intend very shortly to put them in the market.
Any wish for the media landscape in Cameroon? And if you had a message for every citizen in Cameroon and how they could become productive and self-reliant for the economic growth, but most of all, personal emancipation, because when Mr. Bia talks about the 2035 emergence, oh, I'm going to join this into one, because I also want to have words from you on how you look at the former President Aijo, the President Bia, and of course the chairman of the SDF party, how you hold them, what memories you hold of them.
Forgive me, I have to chuckle here, because you talk about all of these men. These are great men. These are men who have made the history of this country. Say what you like, Ahiju was the kind of person he was, but he had his own things that he did positively that helped this country grow from the days of independence until when he left his seat. I think there was admiration for him in many ways, both in this country and out of this country, because he was stern, straightforward, and he did it without mincing words, without batting his eyes. So that was the kind of person that Mr. Ahiju was. He left the scene, and a more liberal personality came into being. That is Paul Biya. And with this declaration or publication of communal liberalism, we took liberalism for a ride. And today we became so free. And we are so free that we have almost lost the mere scruples in our society. We need to chain them. We need to get back the screws so that a few things can be straightened out. Frundi came out with his own new ideas and talked about a revolution. And he, in his declaration on the 26th day of May,
It happens to be my birthday.
1990, he was that one person everybody was looking up to. And for a number of years,
25 years.
many Cameroonians, no, in the early part of the SDF, many Cameroonians looked up to Frundi, because lots of times when certain things did happen, everybody made reference to BANDA, everybody made reference to Frundi. Has Frundi heard of this? I don't know, his popularity may have dwindled somehow because of a lot of other things, but he has his place in history, whether we like it or not. So these three men have their places in the history of this country, and each one of them has his legacy. What do I have to say? Responsibility is usually the word I use. Somebody will ask me, what do you mean by responsibility? I think when we can look at ourselves and determine what we want to do for ourselves, when we can differentiate good and evil and choose the good. You know, Cameroon is such a blessed nation, oh my God. We have so much of natural resources. We have so much of human resources. We have almost everything you can think of. And I want to believe that if we can make use of all of those the right way, and selfishness, greed, nepotism, corruption, and the rest of it are taken out of the way, which is a difficult thing, but gradually we can make it. And if we do, I tell you, 2035 will be like child's play.
Thank you very much, Uncle P, for sparing time off your very busy schedule to talk about your career. I know we've not touched it all because the time is not on our side, but we hope that we can knock at your doors anytime and they'll be open for us.
Listen, Amy, I'm here all the time, available. The only thing that will stop me from being here is when I have no breath anymore.
I'll end with this one, broadcast on the 13th of July 2005. Give real peace a chance. Good relationships are a vital part of life. They bring solace. They stimulate joy and happiness. They bring vitality. When relationships thrive, the fighting and fear within and without us shall be without consequence on our total being. You've been watching Monuments live from the National Communications Council in Cameroon, in the nation's political capital, Yaoundé. We thank you for your kind attention. We'll be with you again on the third Saturday in the month of July on LTN television. Until then, stay blessed, and the best is yet to come.